Estimados participantes, docentes, continuando con nuestro evento, permítanme primero mencionarles un pensamiento. La mejor forma de predecir el futuro es crearlo. Abraham Lincoln. Y mejor con la presencia del distinguido senior analista del Centro de Innovación en Investigación Educativa de la Ocde, Stéphan Vicent-Lancrin. Él es responsable del proyecto sobre el futuro de la educación superior University Futures. Es codirector del grupo de trabajo de capital humano de la estrategia de innovación de la Ocde. Su trabajo anterior incluye la internacionalización y el comercio en la educación superior, así como el aprendizaje electrónico en la educación terciaria. Antes de unirse a la Ocde, ha trabajado durante 7 años como profesor e investigador de economía en la Universidad de París, Nanterre, y la London School of Economics. Él es PhD en economía y maestro en administración de empresas y filosofía. Va a tener a cargo la ponencia cuyo nombre lleva Innovar la educación a través de la digitalización, oportunidades y desafíos, la cual consiste en que la digitalización ofrece muchas posibilidades para innovar la educación. La presentación mostrará un estado del arte de lo que es posible en la actualidad, aunque aún puede implementarse a escala, y reflexionará sobre los desafíos de política para aprovechar al máximo la educación digitalizada. También reflexionará sobre posibles escenarios futuros para la adopción de herramientas digitales en los sistemas educativos y para mejorar la enseñanza y el aprendizaje. Solicito un caluroso aplauso para darle la bienvenida a nuestro distinguido ponente.
And talk a little bit about, what's going on in terms of digital transformation and what kind of future scenarios we can imagine, for the future and what the policy implications are. So what I'm going to do is really to talk to you about a project that we've had at the OECD for, the past 3-4 years, and which started before the COVID pandemic. And at the time, the big questions were really about, all these new buzzwords that we hear everywhere: learning analytics, AI, robots, the Internet of Things, blockchain. And basically, you remember that, the covers of the big international magazines were all about that, how computers were going to replace human beings. And so that really was one of the innovations that we wanted to look at the OECD and try to find to what extent this is going to also transform education. So in between, COVID-19 happened and people had to actually use many of those tools. And so it will be interesting to think about the difference between the, what we were thinking before and what we have witnessed during the pandemic. So most of what I'm going to talk about is actually preserved as part of this book, which is about the frontiers of technology in education. So that's a project which is called Smart Data and AI in Technology, and which is very much about foresight, and currently working more on policies and how actually policymakers can actually make a change. So there are different ways of thinking about all these new technologies and how they can actually impact schools. One is to look at what is the impact of what they're doing on schools and education systems and how they can actually help to digitize many of the processes that you find in education systems. So there are a lot of and a variety of applications that have been developed for that. Probably student information system is the most important one. Those are the systems that allow policymakers to know where students are at any given point of time, and in many cases now with all the modern information system to follow them through their school career, in best cases from kindergarten to the labor market. And they're the one that allow you to act when things are really happening, but also to do good research about it, and I've working for the Center for Educational Research and Innovation, having a good data infrastructure that allows you to do good research is something that is very important. I'm going to talk about it. You have early warning system, but more and more in many countries, admissions to schools or registration to schools are digitized, and sometimes actually based on an algorithm to decide on where students can go. A lot of reporting to parents is being made or contacting, and we could see that it was important during the COVID pandemic. Proctoring systems, I'm going to talk more about that, but also increasingly, the way of resourcing resources and to even manage the energy of campuses to make education more environmental, etc. So there are a lot of promising applications. Some of them here are quite common. Some are totally experimental or marginal in many of the systems. One that's very important is early warning systems, and so they are typically based on these longitudinal data systems I've mentioned before. And basically what they do is to try to solve one problem that is a very big one in many OECD countries. It's about high school dropout. And so one of the things that people want to avoid is basically, it could be middle school dropout as well, but it's to prevent students from dropping out before they have a degree, diploma. And for that, there are a lot of varieties and a lot of work going on about how to actually, what are the predictors of dropping out. Some of these models are very complex, some are very easy. There was a lot of reviews done about them, and actually we could see that many of those models were not as accurate as what we wanted. So in some cases, for example, they only predicted dropout with a chance of 1 out of 2, which is not a great rate of prediction, or you don't need an elaborate system to do that. But some of them managed to do it at with 80s, 85%, which is pretty good. And sometimes with very few indicators, sometimes only 3 points in time. And so, there are a lot of promising opportunities thanks to that. One thing which is interesting with early warning system is that they allow us to show that digitalization is not just important because it allows to do things that are perhaps more difficult to do for human beings, but also because they allow us to think differently about how our systems do actually work. So colleagues in the US, Bowers and Trout, at Columbia University, have done a lot of work on that, and they've identified different types of profiles of dropouts. One that they've called the jaded dropouts. So they are the ones that you would have in mind. People who don't like school, don't perform well in school, and don't have actually declining grades. And indeed, these people actually represent about 40% of the high school dropouts in the US. However, a majority of them have a different profile. The one they've called the quiet dropouts represents actually a majority of them. And they are students who do like school, enjoy going to school, so no strong absenteeism. They also have relatively low grades, but they are increasing grades. However, the problem is that their grades do not increase quickly enough for them actually to successfully finish their year. And then you even have 10% of a different category who are the ones who are actually what they've called the involved dropouts. So they are very involved in school, they're even very strong, they have very good academic results. However, for whatever reason, and usually because of administrative reasons, in the US, you have to collect a certain number of credits to have your high school diploma, and they haven't actually managed to have all of these degrees, and so they end up not having their diploma, and they don't want to continue one more time. So that's so what's important here is that instead of believing that there is just one type of student and one type of intervention that we have to put in place, the fact that you have all these different data allows you to see that actually you have to put in place different types of interventions for different students. So that's a very interesting, important point. And I could take a few other examples to show you that despite of the actual tools doing things and supporting the systems, one very important aspect of it is that it makes us change our way of thinking about it, and that it helps us to make it better, not because the machine does it, but just because we think differently about how it works. Another domain, which actually is very important at the system level, is assessments and exams, as you can imagine. And actually, technology makes the possibility to think about it in a very different way, and to actually assess a lot of skills through simulations and games, so that in fact the tasks that are being done are much more authentic. So here you can see, you have people working on a boat and on a logistical problem, which would actually be much closer to the reality of what they would have to do compared to just answering questions on a piece of paper or a computer. We have an increasing reliability of machine rating for essays, so that's another way to just solve some of the problems of the exams. And the other thing that is that we've seen appearing a lot during the COVID crisis, especially in higher education, is the use of remote proctoring systems based on AI. So basically, those are the systems that allow you to ensure that students can take their exam remotely under the traditional conditions of examination, so that they don't cheat, and they make sure that there is no one in the room, that they are the ones doing the exam, etc., etc. But one thing perhaps which is a bit more radical is that at some point we may even no longer need the assessments and exams, and we may have predictive models that will tell where students can go, where there are chances to succeed based on what they've done in the past. Big problem with that is that, of course, we would need to create the social condition for that to happen. It's a political construct and social construct, and we really have to make it socially acceptable before things like that can happen, because currently, exams are the traditional way of thinking of how to do something which is fair, putting all students in the same position, etc., etc. But we have to keep in mind that this is a construct that has been actually negotiated over time in society, and that we now feel is totally normal and natural, but which is just a social construct like anything else, basically. And last thing I wanted to mention are digital credentials, just to give you an example of how blockchain can be actually used. So there are a lot of new ways to monitor skills in a granular way, so things that would not be possible without technology, just because if you want to go to a more granular level, there are too many things to follow, and so if you don't do it with technology, it cannot work. But what interesting aspect is how actually blockchain, or more precisely, even if it's not on blockchain, verifiable digital degrees and credentials put the learners in charge of their degree, allow them to follow, and saves a lot of administrative costs to systems, while empowering learners to actually take more degrees, diplomas, etc. And this may actually be one of the things that will make another innovation thrive, which are the micro-credentials, thing that we talked a lot. Doesn't really happen at a very big pace right now, but that all these technologies make actually possible as a disruptive way of thinking about how to acknowledge qualifications. So that's really one aspect, and perhaps the easiest one. And the second one is, how we can use AI, digitalization in the classroom as a means to teach and to learn. One of the things that's really at this stage, AI and new digital technologies have managed to do is really to provide personalized learning to students. So give them, for example, a content map that will allow them to move from task to curriculum. They would typically, what they do is that they test the knowledge of the student. They then, so that's the detect phase of the work. Then they try to see what the student should be doing, given that this knowledge, and that the diagnose phase of it. And then they act, so they propose something, which can be actually how to help you to solve a problem. So that would be the step level, how to help you to do a different task, And so here, actually, you're moving, let's say, from you've done enough of subtraction, let's go to multiplications, or is just enough of arithmetic, and so let's go to geometry, for example. And so that's a typical thing that works you through, a different type of curriculum, and which, usually speaking, also provides feedback to teachers when they realize that you need a teacher intervention. And one of the things they do for teachers is sometimes actually to help them to decide on what are the type of pedagogical activities that they should be considering for the students. So is it individual work? Is it a collaborative work, peer work? Is it a project? Is it a lecture, etc.? And so you have a lot of new systems which are actually not doing that with, I would say, a lot of success, and which are getting enriched, also looking at how the students interact with the computer, how they do their tasks, and so how engaged they remain. And so that actually also takes your learning style into account, your level of engagement, etc. So when you think of engagement, so there are a lot of specific body on that, on how to actually improve engagement. And usually you have two different ways. One is basically to try to provide tasks that are more interesting, so that's how usually we use gaming, for example, as a way. Gamification is one example of doing that. So you try to make something which is more like a game to make it more fun and to engage students. But another one is actually to do it in a reactive way, so that actually on the spot you try to re-engage, you detect whether the student is getting disengaged, and you try to re-engage them. So that's one example on that one. So they try to see where you're looking at when you're reading something or what you're trying to do, and when so this example is basically following your eyes, and then when it detects that you're off task, then tries to give you an incentive to get back to it, for example. Another way which I find very interesting, and which is a different way, because instead of taking the students as a unit of analysis, then you take the classroom. So it's really more about how you have tools, you develop tools that helps teachers to deliver while they are doing the teaching, or to have feedback about what they've been doing after class, usually speaking. So here you can see, one way is there are a lot of things. So the way that you need to think about that, the way that it usually works, there are a lot of different ways it works, but the ways it can work is to have smart classroom. Think of your car, so in the past, all the cars were, full of mechanic, and, there wasn't much electronics in them. Nowadays, cars are more like computers on wheels, and they have a lot of sensors. And so if you don't fasten your seatbelt, it will give you a sign. If you're going to hit something, it's going to beep. If someone is the door is not closed, it's going to tell you. If you left your, etc. And so here, that's a bit the same idea, but in a classroom. And so basically, you would have a lot of sensors, computers in the classrooms that would actually provide the teachers with a lot of feedback about what's going on in their class. So, for example, are the students engaged, and how many of them are sleeping right now? Another thing, for example, is one example I like is how you can actually know who you should actually be trying to help as a teacher. So here you can see that it's a kind of ambient dashboard. So you see you have lanterns, the green and the red lanterns, and then here the tutor knows where to go depending on whether people are done with the task that they were doing, or everything is fine, or whether they need some help, etc. Or here it's a tool that helps in group discussion to regulate how much time people have spoken. So here you can see, the lady sitting here has spoken the most. We don't know why. It's perhaps because she's the one who said what the task was. But it gives an indication of how to actually regulate the time, in a group. Or another one, so that's really how to do things in real time, while you are actually teaching. Another example is analysis of what you have been doing during your classroom. So one very simple one is, for example, to record how much time the teacher has spoken during a class, or where the teacher has been located, during a class. So here, that's the example you have on that screen. It shows actually where the teacher was located in the classroom, and so you can see, the big bubble shows that that teacher, spent a lot of time at her desk. But otherwise, you can see that she always went on the left-hand side of the class and almost never on the right-hand side in terms of time. And, again, there might be reasons for that, but perhaps it's not the case. And actually, in the case that I'm showing, the teacher was quite surprised to know that she was only spending time on the left-hand side of the class without no particular reason. And so that's, a tool for reflection, a feedback that you get, and that is automated. So you don't need to have someone to tell you that. The machine can actually do it for you. Very important aspect of digital technology right now is to really make education more inclusive. And so it's not just about, supporting personalization or giving feedback to teachers or supporting teachers, but also providing tools, which actually for some of them are already available as part of, many smartphones. And to have a more inclusive classroom for, visually impaired students or hearing impaired students, to diagnose or address some learning difficulties such as, dysgraphia, dyslexia, easily translate, for learners from minority languages, but also actually trying to help with the more complex needs such as autism or ADHD, for example. And here, what you can see on the screen on the left-hand side is a British solution that actually was developed to help autistic students to socially interact. And the interesting aspect of that one is that, in fact, here we just see an image of the child with the screen, but there is an operator which is actually the one deciding on what this child should be doing. And at the end of the day, it really ends up to be something that is an interaction between the child, the machine, and the human operator. Partly because, in fact, even the autistic child realizes that the machine is not good enough at what it does, and so that some human social interactions are important to supplement what is going on. Last example are robots. So that's the thing that probably teachers fear the most. Are robots going to replace them, like in some other sectors of the economy? Well, currently there is very little risk that this is going to happen. In fact, when you see a robot in a classroom in most countries, it's mainly used as a tool to teach and to learn coding, or computational thinking. So you program and then the robot just does what you have coded. But there is a lot of interesting experimental research on social robots, and so how the social robots can actually be used as instructors, teachers, or peer students. And so they take really the role of teaching aids in the classroom. And the study that have actually analyzed these kind of work has shown that robots are almost as effective as human beings when they do the very narrow task that they were designed for. So they're pretty good at what they do, even so one single robot cannot manage the complexity of all the different things that a teacher is actually doing. And finally, these telepresence robots, which are more like a screen on a stick, but which allows for telepresence, so that you can actually use your teacher in your remote area to teach, the urban students, or vice versa. The teacher in the urban area to teach the students in the remote areas, or when students are sick, etc. So something that could actually be used when in a situation such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the COVID 2029, if there is one. So that's really a lot of different types of possibilities. Now, if we go back to the present, what we've learned from actually the COVID pandemic is that, so with colleagues at the World Bank and Harvard University, we've reviewed a lot of case studies that happened in different countries on how learning continued during the pandemic. Actually, including in Peru, where we had a few case studies on that. And what we've seen is that actually there was absolutely, well, very little AI, which was actually involved. A lot of the response was that there were a lot of multimodal approaches based on online platforms, TV, radio, etc. But I would say used in a very original way and innovative way. So for example, people using WhatsApp as a supplement to TV education to make it more interactive, using them as a way to send quizzes and stay in touch, etc. So, because that's really one of the big critique of all the old media in terms of learning technology. What we've seen nonetheless, the digital infrastructure wasn't ready, and not even in high-income countries. And so, there is a lot of discussion that have started because of that, So should countries invest more? What does it mean to have a free education? What is the digital infrastructure that you need if you want to have digital tools that are part of it? And so how do we actually have to rethink about that? There are a lot of things that AI could have done to support countries during the crisis if more of it were available. So it could have helped for the creation of learning resources, etc. And I've mentioned a few other things that it could actually have done, but it wasn't really there. So what is coming? One thing to keep in mind before to go there, and I'm going to elaborate a bit on that, is first that all the AI solutions that I've presented are based on the current model of schooling, the traditional model. So they were not meant to disrupt it or to transform it, but really to enhance it. So what they do basically is to support human beings, and they really have to be thought of as hybrid human AI models. Most applications are experimental, even so all the things I've shown you, they already exist. So it's not foresight. It's not like this will come one day because one day we will be able to do it, but it is something that is already feasible and has already been tried somewhere. Very few of the solutions, I would say, only personalization of learning, early warning systems, and blockchain are currently used at scale, so at a large scale. Some of these things work more or less, and in many cases, there is very few hard evidence that they do a lot to many of the education objectives. And partly it's because they are often developed coming from another sector, but not really dedicated to education. So many of the challenges that policymakers will have to solve is really around the usefulness of those solutions. And so for that, one way is really to try to involve stakeholders to actually do that, and not just have a system that is developed for, say, the health sector that will just be rolled out in education. So work with the schools on what are the actually cases that need to be solved. So what are the problems that the schools and the teachers have to, rather than what are the solutions that we can provide, whether there is a problem or not. And I'm saying that because one of the big I would say critiques of technology in education is really the fact that we had in the past all these computer boxes and with computers that were never used or that didn't have any positive effect on learning outcomes. Larry Kilman was one of has written a very strong book on that. And it's still a problem. And I would say that, part of the problem, people say that people don't like innovation, but I think that one of the big problems sometimes is that the solution that are being developed is not useful enough for the education systems. Second aspect is the effectiveness of it. And so here, it's important to make sure that AI does what it says it does, or any other digital technology solution. And also verify that it improves outcomes. That's something which is pretty difficult because, in fact, it's quite difficult to research many of the solutions because they evolve much more quickly than, let's say, you would have time to do a randomized control trial of their effect. So by the time you're done with your RCT, the solution has already had a lot of technology iterations, and so that's really one of the difficulties. Another one is equity, so some aspects, and I've mentioned how it can actually improve equity by making education more inclusive, for example, in some cases by helping to reduce the achievement gap between disadvantaged students and advantaged students, but it can also do the opposite. And so one important aspect is really to privilege shift solutions that run on existing platforms so that actually they are affordable to schools, but also to establish standards and interoperability standards so that when people buy edtech products, they are not locked in one particular solution, and the product can actually be sustaining over time, or they can actually move the data from one solution to another one, etc., so that it's worth buying these different products. A new thing that is appearing with, especially with algorithm and with AI, is the question of fairness. So making sure that, when things are a bit opaque, the old biases are not replicated, and also that new biases are also not replicated, because in fact, the way that AI learns is to learn on past data, basically. The fifth one is about transparency. And one of the difficulties that we have, especially with AI, is that it's not always easy to understand what it does. So one, like there is one for the open data movement, which requires people to open, their data sets, etc., etc. There is now this open algorithm movement as well, which basically is the idea to make your algorithms scrutinized by other people. So most likely it wouldn't be someone like me, because I wouldn't be able to do that. Perhaps if someone in your room would be, but other experts can actually do it, and they can verify, challenge, check whether these things, how the things work. In some countries, there is the requirement that algorithms are explainable. Yes.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, this is the time. Sorry, because the next activity is the final ceremony.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to finish then. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and then of course we have the question of data protection. So I wanted to show you 3 future scenarios, but I'm going to skip that and just conclude, and to say that, there are a lot of opportunities that are offered by digitalization to improve and transform education, but also a lot of risk. And at the end of the day, it's really how it's used that will actually make a difference. One thing that people tend to not look highly enough is actually how you reshape your social models around those tools, and how you create social acceptance with something that is easy to resist or to reject. And so it's very important to think of how they can help us to change our ways of thinking. It's costly, there is a maintenance of infrastructure, and so it has to come with benefits, and perhaps actually including productivity benefits. We have to do things differently to make them actually worth the cost of using that. And so we have to think about that. But as a final point, we really have to keep in mind that it's really affecting all sectors of the economy and our societies. And so because of that, it's really unlikely that it will let education on the side. And so we really have to think hard about it. And I believe that the right way to do it is to think about it internationally. And so, I hope we'll continue the conversation. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Vicent.
Very welcome.